What's going on, everybody? I'm Tom.
I'm Pat.
And I'm Zach.
We're best friends, and you're listening to the Reminiscent Podcast. They say you can't choose your family. Well, you also can't choose which era of music you grew up in. This is a weekly show where we discuss our favorite bands from adolescence and how they continue to shape our lives today. Each week, we'll head back to the early 2000s and take a closer look at the cards we were dealt.
Tom, we have a special guest today.
We have a very special guest today. Very few special guests on this show, not usually our typical thing, but we have with us today Bill Conway, the co-founder, managing editor, and head writer at The Hard Times. He's the host of the brand new The Hard Times podcast. If anyone out there for some reason doesn't know what The Hard Times is, imagine like The Onion, but funnier, a little more clever. And if all the writers there were like replaced with a bunch of straight edge hardcore kids, that's kind of what we're looking at. Would you agree with that, Bill? Is that pretty?
I think that is spot on. Yeah, I don't know if The Onion has a single straight edge writer, so therefore, I mean, depending on most people would probably, and I'm vegan too, so most people would probably be like, well, there's not a funny bone in that guy's body, so they're already like tuning out, like straight edge vegan. What the hell's that all about? But no, yeah. So I think you nailed it.
Awesome. And also, I want to point out that Pat is now the minority. There are now two straight edge hosts on this podcast.
Hell yeah. Hey, Pat, what the f***'s up, man? What's going on here?
I just feels good to be here, man. I'm just happy to participate. And,
why? Because you got a buzz going right now? You can't podcast without knocking back a couple of tall boys?
Yeah, gotta stay numb, baby. Can't let the weight really hit. It would be too much to bear for sure, so...
You know, Bill, you think you're joking, but you should have heard the first 50 episodes of this podcast.
Yeah, for anyone just joining us, and you probably will be because Bill's on, the first 75 episodes were a quick... Anyway, we eventually got married and settled down a bit, so...
Not us, but two separate...
Well, yeah, we did, literally, and then the
you two are married, and one of you is a raging alcoholic, while the other one tries to manage that as you run a business together and podcast.
That's right. Bill, it took you less than a minute to figure out the whole arc of the entire show. Which
most guests, it takes them like the full hour, and
right.
So here we go. So guys, thank you for having me. It's been great. I guess I got a couple things I need to plug.
Yeah.
Yes, by all means.
Let's go for it.
Yeah. Well, so as you mentioned, the Hard Times, we just launched our podcast first. For when will this episode be coming out? Right now, is this going to be a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks? What schedule are you guys on?
It'll be this Friday, so like 3 days.
Okay, so this Friday. So as soon as you hear this, we had just had John Joseph of the Cro-Mags on, and that episode is ridiculous because that man has stories on top of stories to the point where, like, I mentioned it in the podcast, but you don't hear me talk more than like 3 times in the hour that we talk to him because he just has so much. Like, he's like, yeah, so then I got stabbed and shot by a pedophile. And it's just like, but that's like a setup to another story. Like, wait, let's go back to that one part where you got stabbed. And it's just crazy. But yeah, that's the Hard Times podcast that I have with my with the other Hard Times founder and editor-in-chief, Matt Sankum. And we recently launched that. We've had Andy Hurley of Fall Out Boy, and people are like, why you have a guy from Fall Out Boy? It's because he's fucking vegan, straight edge, plays in Race Trader, still plays in basements, even though he's the richest man you will ever meet in your life. And Frank Turner and Brian Baker. So it's been pretty cool so far. But yeah.
And they're all pretty much primarily interview-based shows?
Yeah. So usually what we'll do is Matt and I will just kind of, it's like we kind of follow the WTF format of things where we have a 15 minutes at the top that people just skip and go straight to the interview. But if you don't skip that part, we usually just talk about some things that have happened at our 4 years of doing the Hard Times, just things from behind the scenes. And because we've kind of remained anonymous for the 4 years of our website, and then we're coming out of the woodwork and just being like, it's us now. This is what we look like.
So I'm interested because So we were not yet in high school, but you graduated in 2002. I guess we should say that this is the 2002 mixtape draft for those joining us for that specific reason, and of course because Bill's here. But so you might have a different take on this whole year, a year of music altogether.
Yeah, I graduated in 2002 from a school in Massachusetts. So I was a senior. I'm sure every episode you do has to go back to 9/11 in some way, shape, or form. But yeah. So obviously, if you do the math correctly, September 2001 would have been the beginning of my senior year of high school. So that was, the world changed, guys. The world changed. So 2002 was an interesting year for sure, because that's the year I became no longer a high school student and had to go on to whatever was next, which was me going to college and then dropping out like 6 months later.
I kind of wouldn't mind delaying the draft forever and just interviewing you about the hard times and how that got started. Maybe we'll save more of that for the end. But did you kind of know when you went to school that you wanted to pursue comedy in some way, or where'd you go after Massachusetts?
So that's actually interesting. So, and I don't want to talk negatively about my mother or father in any way, but they are not my dad especially was not a creative guy. You know, his dream for me was become an electrician and a plumber, and that way you'll have 2 licenses and you can basically set your prices. And it's like, okay, fully ignoring any other like creative outlet that I was interested in. So I never was pushed in that direction. I'm so jealous of people that have like creative parents where you can see like there's a route to something. Like even if you had like an uncle, it's like, oh yeah, your uncle wrote a book once. Like, how does that even happen though? Like, what do you mean he wrote a book? So I didn't start doing stand-up until I was 27, and that was in San Francisco. And it was just after listening to podcasts for a while, and comedy podcasts, especially like there was an episode of WTF with damn it, I can't think of his name right now, Brendan something, and he was just talking about, just go do open mics. That's all you do. I was like, right. Just go do it. And so, but for a solid 10 years, basically after high school, it was just me continuing to skateboard all the time. That's all I wanted to do was skateboard and cause trouble. And so I did.
That's not a bad way to spend time.
Yeah. And then I settled down by becoming a stand-up comedian. And, people think it's a lot of fun. It's not. It's the worst. Stand-up comedy is terrible.
Yeah, I think Pat can confirm that one, right?
Oh, it was weird. I did a few open mics in Albuquerque when I was out there, and I thought it would be like this lightning in a bottle moment. Like, yeah, this is it, but it's just really hard work. You're just like, even the good set out of 10 bad ones are like, this is not fulfilling at all. This is awful. So it's a slog, but
you have to have like a sickness to continue.
There
with
is
it.
kind of, it is kind of, that's a good way to put it, but I feel that a little bit. I did not try it for long enough to even claim any of that lifestyle at all, but because I wimped out after maybe 7. But yeah. Tom, do you have a dice prepared? Is that correct? Because I have an embarrassing first pick ready that I want to get out of the way a little bit. I'm a little nervous, although I do want to say this first. Anything that happens from here on out in the draft, Bill, I picked Lifehouses Hanging by a Moment in the inaugural 2000 draft, so the most embarrassing thing to happen in these drafts has already happened. So the options are limitless, and there's no wrong answers here for sure.
That's good to know.
I gotta say, I've been listening to that song a lot since we did that draft.
I will go to bat for it, but I can see where people would maybe categorize it with. I've heard others categorize it with Creed and Nickelback and all things like that.
Well, Lifehouse was a Christian band, right? Like they were like straight up Christian.
I'm not even sure, actually. All I know, I just know that one hit, and I thought it was great. Yeah, because there's strings in it for no reason. I was like, what a weird time.
I'm a sucker for songs with strings in them. I'll straight up, like, there's if you put strings in a song, like, then it's all of a sudden I'm like, this is on a different level, even. And then when you see it live and it's done by a keyboard player, you're like, fuck this.
Or it's Attack and their MacBook Pros playing it, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of a weird time, but yes, I have a D20 prepared. This is the largest dice we've used. So I'm going to roll for Bill first. What is that? We got an 8. Pat, a 1. What a fucking loser.
Oof, brutal.
How do you even get that low?
Not only am I not straight edge or vegan, I can't even get more than one single freaking dice.
Holy crap.
There's so many sides on it, too.
That's embarrassing.
It really is.
And I rolled a 14. I think this is the first time I've ever gone first.
It's true.
and I needed it because there are some good songs that came out in 2002. I don't know what you guys think, but oh god, so I guess I'll kick it off. We just did this episode maybe 3 weeks ago, but the starting line came out with The Best of Me, and gotta pick that right out of the gate. I mentioned my band used to cover that. It was the only song anyone ever gave a shit about when we performed, and one of the maybe top 10 pop punk songs of the early 2000s. Yeah, The Best of Me by The Starting Line.
Wow. Nice pick.
First pick.
And this was a genre of music that I so keep in mind, so I'm 18 years old in 2002, and so I'm like violently against music like this, especially at the time. Like I've softened on it now. It's just not for me, but at the time, like my little brother, who's 2 years younger than me, like this was exactly, like he would play this song all the time. And
yeah, so how were high schoolers reacting to all this hair straightening and everything at the time? Like, was it, because for us it was like, this freaking rocks, I'd love to kiss a girl. But I can imagine if you're already in high school, like hanging, like it has a different feel probably.
Yeah, so for me, this was, especially being in Massachusetts at the time, and this was like peak of me being like only into like hardcore, more or less. If you were to listen to this, you would have to drive from Massachusetts up to maybe like the Canadian border, then listen to it in the trunk of your car just to be safe, that nobody heard you listening to this. Because my brother, he was straightening his hair at the time. Now he is bald as a cue ball, so there's some sort of karma there. But this was all the stuff that he was absolutely into, and I vividly remember like walking in on him listening to this song and just being like, God, I can't believe we're related.
Sounds like when my dad walked in on me watching 500 Days of Summer during the Hall & Oates scene where they're dancing. He's like, I'm not going to say words. I'm going to leave the room, though. And, weird decade to grow up in.
Oh, man. And yeah, for anyone that, doesn't regularly listen to the show, Pat and I graduated high school together in 2009. So, yeah, a little bit of an age gap.
That's a good piece of information. Right. I kind of just dove right into it without any explanation at all. I got to lay off the sauce.
Yeah, I know you guys during our email thread were really ripping into me for my advanced age, wondering if I would be able to figure out how to use Skype, if I knew how to get on the internet, if I could transfer my CDs into MP3 form, all this stuff.
Yeah, you old
What are you taking with your number one pick?
My number one pick, so I went through my mental Rolodex of what came out in 2002, and I thought, like, well, I can't pick only the hardcore bands that I listened to look like Mr. Tough Guy, Cool, Mr. Hard Times, oh yeah, these guys only are punk and hardcore. And I was like, I'll list what I was actually listening to. And that, I think, a masterpiece of 2002 was Minus the Bears' Highly Refined Pirates, especially the song Get Me Naked 2, Electric Boogaloo. If you haven't heard that song, you're doing yourself no favors. It's an amazing song. Minus the Bear, especially at that time, was at the peak of their Minus the Bearness. And that song, in 2002, I was also in a relationship with a girl I should not have been in a relationship with. So all these songs have those feelings attached to them. Like, oh, these were the great times, and oh, these were the worst fucking times. And but especially Get Me Naked 2, Electric Boogaloo by Minus the Bear. All the lyrics are about traveling to Europe and stuff like that. And I listened to it and I'm like, oh man, this brings me back.
Yikes.
Tom, I realized something just now. This would be such a vastly better podcast if we were of music listening age during the early 2000s. That's like the best draft pick ever on this show. God, that's embarrassing for us. That's such a good pick. How long were you with the girl?
Okay, so when you're in high school and relationships seem like they're like 10-year relationships, but it was actually like 18 months. That was the kind of the situation.
That's a long one.
Yeah,
that's significant. Yeah.
And then we broke up for a while, and then we got back together when I moved to the West Coast, which was even worse idea. Guys, if you ever move away and you're like, oh, I feel lonely out here, I should get back together with my ex-girlfriend, don't do it. That is such a stupid move. You broke up for a reason, and then moving across the country and being super stressed out and not having anybody except the person you kind of hate already there. Oh, my God.
Noted.
Yeah, so that also ruined like 2008 for me. I can't listen to the Gaslight Anthems, the 59 sound without being reminded me of that. And I'm like, damn it, this is like the best album of all time, and it reminds me of fucking this bullshit.
Yeah, it's tough when a very good album is tied to a very specific negative memory.
Yeah, the 59 sound brings me to weird relationship for sure. So
I kind of want to survey everyone's first sentence they say after, like, if you ask them, like, if there was a jaywalking segment, like, what comes to mind when you think of 59 sound? I wonder how much it would be positive, actually. Like, oh, man. That's where, like, I was going through it for sure. But,
Yeah, like that album I can distinctly remember. So I was, in San Francisco, I was living with this woman that I should not have been living with. And I remember like taking this Geary bus like down Geary Street after work, listening to that, like walking to my apartment. She was a flight attendant, so I never really knew her schedule when she'd be home or not. And if I saw like the light onto my apartment, I would just walk around the block for like an extra like 2 or 3 hours and be like, I can't go up there. I can't fucking go up there. It was one of those. It was that bad, but thankfully it ended, and now I'm in a happily married 34-year-old man with 2 cats while fostering a puppy. So everything's good.
Hell yeah.
Nice. The journey is the destination.
Yep.
I think that's a Hey Arnold meme or something. I don't even know. I'm in over my head already. Which is why I'm going to pick 2. I'm just going to put these out there, I think. I'm going to go ahead. And yeah, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to say these 2 real quick because they deserve to be on the list. 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton and Soak Up the Sun by Sheryl Crow. They were going to end up on the list regardless, and I just need the world to know that they are on there now. Yeah, no shame. If I'm being true, you brought up a good point, Bill, because we run into this when we do these drafts. There's a difference between what you're listening to now that happened to come out that year and what you actually were listening to at the time. And damn, I can't even. I'd be ashamed if I looked at my iTunes numbers right now on 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton. The truth is the truth, and it's going to get out at some point.
Well, yeah, I'm always curious about that too. Like, what the most listened to song on people's various like formats are, and like, thankfully, I think I listened to "Hybrid Moments" by the Misfits like exponentially more than anybody like any other song. So it's like, all right, at least I have that as a buffer to all the other crap that could possibly affect it. But guys, "Hybrid Moments."
Right. For some reason in my head, I'm always like, someone's going to break in someday and look at this and judge me for it and talk to me about it. But that would never happen. But I always think on those terms somehow, like, well, yeah, it's a pretty justifiable top 10 most listened to. I don't know. But anyway, those are my picks.
You don't know somebody hasn't broken in and already looked at it and left in disgust, just shaking their head.
Well, we have an Alexa, so everything's out there anyway. So.
Yeah, you're right.
It's over. It's already over.
At least it's not in the room with you going off every time it...
Yes, that was an easy fix that took me months to figure out.
What, so every time you mentioned like 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton, it would just start playing? You're like, damn it, shut up, Alexa.
Happened more often than you think, Bill. It happened more often than you think.
The best one was when it just woke up and started defining free will. That was the weirdest shit I've ever seen.
That was a trip for sure.
Brought the whole episode to a screeching halt for sure.
Yes.
So we're back at you, Bill, for your number 2.
Okay. Looking over my list here, I'm gonna stick. So the guitar player of Minus the Bear was like his new band at that time, but he had been in people will call it a mathcore band, but I would call them, I don't know, they're hardcore adjacent. It's tough to classify them, but he was in a band called Botch, and they released their final album, which was an EP that year. And this was the year I was introduced to Botch, just as they were basically disappearing. And it was called Anthology of Dead Ends. The song is called Framps, like France, but with an N, an M instead of an N. And so all the tracks, the 6 tracks, it's like Afghanistan, Spame, Framps, and like it's just like, kind of weird stuff. But this song in particular off that is just like, if you were to put on that song and you don't start like moshing immediately, I'm sorry, you're dead. Like, check your pulse, brother. Like, you got nothing flowing through you. It's heavy as shit. and it's the same guitar player as Minus the Bear, so it's one of those things like his name's like, it's spelled like Knudsen, like Knudson, but I've heard it's like Knudsen is how you pronounce it, but I would just say Dave Knudsen just to be Anglo safe, I guess. But that guy, amazing guitar player. Botch, amazing legendary band, one of the only bands that if they were like, hey, Botch is reuniting in Seattle, what are you gonna do? Be like, well, I'm buying a ticket to Seattle right now. I will camp out and wait for tickets. They're one of the only bands that will get me to do that. But Botch, Framps off Anthology of Dead Ends, it's pure gold.
I have to ask, because Tom and I do the show and we know each other's musical taste in and out. Is Minus the Bear like easily your favorite or in your top 5? Or what are some of the artists, like what are we working with here? How do you skew in terms of like some of your favorites, some of your go-to albums, things like that?
Don't answer him. He's looking for insider information to steal.
No, I'm not going to steal. It's already clear. Did you see my first 2 picks? Like, what espionage is going to win me this draft? There's nothing.
Yeah, so, yeah, as you guys had mentioned before we started recording, we might have the same picks. Since you went Sheryl Crow, Vanessa Carlton right off the top, and I picked vaguely obscure, like, indie and hardcore bands, like, I'm thinking we're pretty safe here.
Yeah, we're safe. We're safe.
But... I mean, cliche and like, so Minor Threat is always going to be number 1 on my list of things because 12 years old, Minor Threat, you know, basically informed everything. But as, I mean, I think musical tastes go in cycles, you know, so throughout high school, it was like strictly punk and hardcore. That just reminded me of a band that I needed to look up. One of my picks might have to change real quick, guys. Or maybe I'll save it for the honorable mentions.
There you go.
All through high school, it was like, I am only going to listen to punk, metal, like death metal, grindcore, like just the most unlistenable stuff. And then eventually my views started to soften, and like my all-time favorite bands, Saves the Day.
Sure.
I love Alkaline Trio. Minus the Bear is definitely up there, at least their first couple albums. Cave In is one of my all-time favorite. Like the Cave In out of Boston, they changed just the way people did metalcore, and then went into what Cave In did later, like a space rock thing. Everything they did was great to me. But it's now I just listen to the band like Iron Chic on repeat. That's really Iron Chic and the Menzingers because I'm 34 years old.
It's nice when you're younger and you kind of have the patience to chew through some of the rougher stuff, and then you have kind of I think I'm stealing a Marin bit at this point, but he talks about like he doesn't have time to get into Fish at this age and stuff like that. But it's like when you mention that, you're like, yeah, I got nothing but long bus rides. I'll just go into this band and really dig into them.
Right.
It's a little easier when you're younger, obviously.
So being a fan of Alkaline Trio, what do you think about Skiba in Blink? Because that's like kind of what we grew up on, like our favorite band.
So as a fan of Alkaline Trio, I say, get paid, bro. You know, like,
right.
Like, I hope that he can, I don't know. I grew up on, as I've mentioned 70 times already, grew up on punk and hardcore. And there was a kind of a notion of bands selling out and whatever. And they're just mentioning Cave In, they were called sellouts because they signed to a major label in like 2001, and their style kind of changed. But like, I think we live, like, at least to me, live in a post-sellout culture where it's just like, yes, get paid, please.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Like I don't, maybe it's just a factor of my age, but it's just like, I want the artists that I listen to be able to make their art and get the due credit they deserve for it, you know, financially, because just doing the hard times, I know how hard it is to get any money out of doing your creative means. It's very tough. And if people are listening to you, get paid. Matt Skiba, continue to be in Blink-182. Tom DeLonge can, you know, keep jerking off people at NASA or whatever the he's doing over there. And I liked a couple tracks off the new Alkaline Trio album. That first one, Is This Thing Cursed stuff, like the opening track, that's a great song. Then it kind of falls off after that, but that first song is great.
I don't know how this will make you feel, Bill, but around this time, 2000, I guess it would have been 2004 that I was really listening to it, really got into Norma Jean, and Memphis Will Be Laid to Waste came out in 2002. Anytime Pat asks, what's a tritone again? I play that song for him. Just that super stereotypical, really dirty sounding guitar. This was kind of like my introduction into whatever subgenre of hardcore you want to call this. Still listen to Norma Jean. Just really fun, heavy music super weird music videos.
Norma Jean might be the reason we started the show. If you really broke it down, our discussions about the sound they produced, I think, to give Bill some context, because the whole point of the show in theory was like, was this, because boomers love to, shit on millennials or whatever, or that's supposed to be the conversation, but we kind of wanted to dig through it all and what we were actually dealt with and everything like that. And to me, Norma Jean's a pretty good example of like, what exactly was this? And was it bad or good? Can you even say? And that's kind of what the show is, I guess, Bill, to give you enough background as to what we try to do on a week-to-week basis. But I love the pick, Tom, and I'm curious to hear Bill's thoughts.
So, as now for the 71st time, grew up on punk and hardcore. And the Boston hardcore scene was so thriving at this point that basically I was only listening to bands from Massachusetts.
Okay.
And like when Norma Jean came through, I remember their hat, like I stop at all like barbecues, something in Norma Jean shows, and I never gave them a chance. Like I would have, I probably would have loved them at that time, but I never actually like dove in and gave them like the proper listen that they probably deserved at that time, because I know they were a big band. I know they were a talented band, but they were just one of those ones that I was so in my own little world that it was just like, I'm sorry, I just don't listen to Norma Jean.
No, I kind of envy that like community that you were a part of. I've never lived in a place that really had a super strong music scene. Would have been nice, man.
Where did you grow up?
Well, we both grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which doesn't really have any community or culture.
I feel like we missed the era of the scene, though, because like my sister, who was about 3 or 4 years older than me, got to see, or people her age would have had the chance to see, like Gym Class Heroes, Fall Out Boy, Motion City Soundtrack. Some of those bands, when they were coming up, came through Erie when they were passing through Cleveland and stuff like that. So, but by the time we got there, I don't know if the scene was weaker, but it was just different, right, Tom?
Well,
not as many big names came.
That's also not the scene. That's just bands happen to come through town. But
that's a good point.
But even, to that point though, bands do not come through that town anymore, like at all.
Right. So I'm also jealous, Bill, of like growing up. Were you in the Boston, like greater metropolitan area, or?
Yeah, I lived 40 minutes south of Boston, and so it's weird. Like I've only lived in cities for most of my adult life, so I kind of forget what it's like living in a suburb. But I feel like Massachusetts, the suburbs are so densely packed. Like even we didn't have to travel into Boston to go to shows. There was like, the VFW hall in Kingston, another tiny town that nobody would ever go to. There was like great hardcore happening there. And by great hardcore, I mean great for this, scene, like where none of those bands recorded anything more than like a 5-song demo, but we all like went nuts for them,
and it was 7 minutes long, right?
Exactly. And those are still songs that like I think about. I'm like, damn, whatever happened to those guys?
Yeah.
It's just, it's like, oh yeah, they just grew up like we all did. But yeah, it's one of those things. Like there was a lot of shows, and I had a friend that played. He was a drummer, so he played in every band. So it just
right.
I would just ride with him to shows, and this guy, Scott Smith, he plays in a couple bands now. I would just kind of follow along with him in whatever band he was in. Like that's the show I'm going to, because I can just walk in the door with him. I'll carry your bass drum and then I'll get in for free. So yeah, that's mainly what I was doing at this time. And Norma Jean, unfortunately, they just weren't there for me.
Weren't necessary. I mean, speaking of straight hair and tight pants, though, they fit right in with that scene that you were sounds like you were maybe avoiding a little bit with the starting line reference of the of that whole style.
Yeah, I remember at that time there was a Hellfest. I think it was either 2002 or 2003 Hellfest that I went to in New York. I don't know if it was Syracuse or not, but they were selling these shirts that just said like fashion core, like moshing, fighting, good hair on it. It was just and I remember buying that shirt because that was like what the bands were at that time, like the Trustkill Records band and bands like 18 Visions was popping off. And that's kind of like, even, through emo up through like metalcore, like everybody was wearing eyeliner and just borrowing their girlfriend's pants and all that good stuff. So yeah, it was definitely looking back, everybody had an embarrassing time. If you were, you guys were too young to really truly be embarrassed, but if you were 18 at the time and dressed like some of the people I saw at shows, thankfully skateboarding always influenced my dress and not music. So it was like, I can just get away with, look at me wearing an extra large Element shirt, I'm not super embarrassed by that. I was a teenage skateboarder.
Dude, this just reminds me of one of the Hard Times articles about the Osiris shoes blowing up to 10 times its size in self-defense or something.
Yeah. Yeah, the Osiris D3s expand when threatened.
Love it. God, I guess keeping in theme with the straight hair, my wife was kind of going through some songs from the year, and this was her pick, and I gotta say, I wholeheartedly agree with her. Very glad that I married her. She thought this draft cannot be done without Cute Without the E, cut from the team, being involved by Taking Back Sunday.
That almost made my list. That was the song.
Good pick.
That was the song off of that album that I was looking at, and very, very close to making my list.
It's actually, yeah, our band used to cover that one too, and it was a crowd pleaser. But yeah, I mentioned, God, early on sometime in this show, having a MySpace photo with putting finger guns to my head, making this face well, this is it, and just being oh, you tell all your friends you've got your gun to my head, just so. Oh my God.
Damn it. That's a good pick because somehow that slipped through my modest, little bit of Googling I did in prep. But damn it, I did not realize that Tell All Your Friends came out in 2002. That's highly disappointing. I'm very jealous, but also proud for you because that's an awesome pick. But son of a bitch.
It could have come out in 2006. I'm bad at this game.
No, you're on it. I just looked it up. I'm very disappointed in myself. That's a good pick. Gosh.
Yeah, that going back to the Hard Times, one of my favorite Hard Times articles. So Matt, my Hard Times co-founder, him and I have different musical upbringings where he came from more of an oi background. It's almost so he thinks oi headlines are super funny and that everybody was gonna laugh at him. Nobody in the world listens to oi music but you and four goons, nobody cares about this crap. And so I always have to shut those down. But there was one that was everybody in Taking Back Sunday sing along, taking lead vocals, and it's just about basically that song, and nobody doing that background mumble part, it's just and yeah, that song, I don't know. I have a friend that I met when I lived in Portland. He's actually from Massachusetts as well. I think 1 or 2 years older than me, but him and I bonded over that record because we found out we have so much in common, and that was one of the things we just have a lot of, because one of the cheesiest lines ever is on that album. It's I've got the mic and you've got the mosh pit, which is the dumbest fucking line. And so
I used to love that line so much.
You raise a good point, though, Bill. I just went to the theater last year. We've been trying to watch the Oscar movies before the Oscars, and we went to see Bohemian Rhapsody and the scene at the end at Wembley and all that. And I'm trying to think if they ever do an Adam Lazzara movie. They just there's no stadium. It's just a dark basement and everyone's wearing tight jeans and they're screaming to the same lead part, your Hard Times article or whatever. It's a way shittier movie. And we're never going to get to grow up and just glorify it because we know it wasn't that glory filled to begin with.
Right.
Oh, well.
And then who do they cast as bloated older Adam Lazzara? You're oof, God, he's not looking too good. That's really that same super skinny guy? Are you sure?
Right. Yeah, it's not the future's not bright for our musical biopics in the future. Oh well, I think you're up, Bill. This is round is this time 3 officially?
3, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think I will go here since this is a late replacement. This one is coming off the bench. This band was super important to me, and this album came out in 2002. This band is Engine Down. The album was Demure, and the song off of that is the title with the first track. It's called Songbird, and so this band. 72nd time. I grew up on punk and hardcore. I thought that was all I was able to listen to. And then I heard Engine Down probably my late sophomore or junior year of high school. They are an indie rock post-hardcore. I don't know how you want to define them. They kind of softened over time. But they were the band that was like, oh, I can enjoy other music other than stuff that people want, like mosh to or whatever. Like, it was the defining band to switch that. And their album Demure in 2002, the first song, Songbird, I remember listening to it while driving and like being so into it that I zoned out and almost hit a telephone pole, you know, just being like, oh crap, like I can't listen to this album while driving. This band is too good. And they're probably, even though I haven't seen them live because they broke up in like 2006 or whatever, in over a decade, I probably have seen that band live more times than any other band, because anytime they came through Massachusetts, if they did like 2 dates in Massachusetts, one in Boston and one in Western Mass, it was like, oh, I'm going to both of those.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, that band, Engine Down, Demure, and the song is Songbird. Amazing stuff. Drummer's amazing. His name is Cornbread Compton, and he does some. He's still active in music, but just all around amazing band. And their best album is To Bury Within the Sound. And if you listen to that album and don't like the song Intent to Pacify, once again you're dead inside, because that is that song, it will get you.
Got a lot of stuff to catch up on from 2002, man. I'm excited.
The eyes are being opened
Right.
every minute. Gosh darn. All right, I got a couple coming up, and now I'm realizing that there's like 3 or 4 different 5 songs. I hate that we do these only 5 rounds, because I definitely mispicked the first 2 rounds like I always do. And now I'm looking at every song I actually like. Golly. Okay. There is one song I want to pick for my mix that is only, it's more of a bit than something I was listening to. So I'm going to save it.
So it's a Weird Al song
I'm gonna
or
pick
something?
it. Well, it's Work It by Missy Elliott. I'm going to pick it because it was a freaking bop. And if you're from Mmmbop Wen Yin is one of the best things to say ever. And it's very pleasing to the ear. Elephant Noises talking about junks and trunks and all that. An awakening at the middle school dance, if I would go as far as to say. I would say I didn't realize until a clean 15 years later that she was that line was actually, she was pronouncing it backwards, or they were playing it backwards. Which again is me learning things way too late. But I'm going to say Work It by Missy Elliott. Her work there was obviously top notch. And I'm going to keep it real boring, I think. This is the boring pick of, like, my dad was listening to this. Like you said, Bill, this was right after 9/11. Springsteen's The Rising album came out. It was something my dad was real into, so it was definitely on the radio in the car and at home and everything like that. I'm going to say Lonesome Day by Springsteen would have been in my CD player one way or another as well.
Yeah, so was he singing a lot about being like a patriot at that time, or was he still talking about like the dust factories in Ohio or whatever that were closing
It's a good
down?
question, and he's covered all that. But this specifically it's weird because I do want to play along, but also it was a super 9/11 album. So it was just a lot of Empty Sky, Lonesome Day, Counting on a Miracle, stuff like that. But one of his best late career efforts, I would say. Anyway, I'm a Springsteen Weezer guy, Bill, for a little bit of background. So I just really do like the song, unironically.
So when you say you're a Springsteen Weezer guy, is that like one of those things like Mets Jets and then Yankees Giants sort of thing?
Ooh,
like
interesting. Let's see. That's a good question. Mostly like my dad tried to send me down one path, and my cousin was like, try this too, and then neither worked. So my taste in music has always just been like fundamentally flawed. So yes, I always go into these drafts knowing I'm gonna like totally like botch it all over, because there's 3 of my like favorite songs from that year I'm realizing I haven't picked yet. So it's just a mess. It's a mess.
What are you doing?
Well, I wanted to do the Work It by Missy Elliott thing because it's a fun song. And
No,
plus,
it's great.
Yeah, it's really good.
I mean, that's one of those songs that has, as far as hip hop is concerned, where it still gets people excited. Like, you know, if she came out at the Super Bowl this year or something like that and did that, people would have, like, I know that happened a couple years back, but it's still like people would just lose their minds and just be like, yeah, killing it.
Yeah, she went to a new status after that album, I think. It was Yeah. Anyway, those are my picks. I'm sticking with them.
All right. So does that mean it comes back to me at this point?
Oh yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm gonna go with a little band called Piebald. They released their album "We Are the Only Friends That We Have" in 2002, February 19th to be exact. The date of this record is the 17-year anniversary of this album coming out, and this was another one of those bands that was like, oh, I can listen to music that isn't just hardcore. And this album Piebald was a Massachusetts band that started almost like a screamo sort of thing. They came up with like Converge and stuff like that and Cave In, and then their sound started to change drastically, and they released this album, which was almost like a poppier effort. And I remember vividly listening to this album on repeat while trying to beat Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 because I didn't like that soundtrack as much, so I would just put this Piebald song. And I guess the track off of that would be the title track, "We Are the Only Friends That We Have," off of that album. And they kind of have jokey lyrics, in a way where they're kind of self-deprecating, but they were a band that would have been in the genre of, your swoopy haired guys. Like they would have played on the same shows, but you would have walked out of there being like, that band was different. They were, they were cool or something, or you would have hated them because they weren't like poppy enough or something like that. But strangely enough, I eventually became friends with their drummer, which is just one of those things like, oh, life is weird. These bands that you think are like so up there on a pedestal, and it's like, oh yeah, they're just, but it turns out they just work regular jobs in Boston, and they didn't make all the money that they should have from this because record labels are kind of scummy sometimes, and people should, the music industry is inherently flawed and people should get paid more for what they do, but they don't, and whatever, so there's my tangent on that. But yeah, Piebald, "We Are the Only Friends That We Have," off of "We Are the Only Friends That We Have." Great song, great band. And if you want to listen to the best Piebald song ever, it's Grace Kelly with Wings. And if anybody disagrees, come fight me.
Whoa. That's a pretty Boston thing to say. I like the energy.
I'm sorry, I can't. I've been outside of Boston for 13 years, but it's still going to be inside of me.
I was going to say I couldn't catch any of the accent at all, but the whole come after it. I like it. I like the energy. I have to admit.
All right, I got my last two.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to be the doubling up heading into the final round.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go, obviously, with "My Friends Over You" by Newfound Glory.
I didn't realize that was 2002. I was actually going to look up their discography and kind of slip my mind to see what they had in 2002, because my friends were definitely listening to a lot of Newfound Glory at that time, and so because of the endless car rides, it would have been in my ears a lot as well.
Right. Yeah, this was, I guess, a defining song of my childhood. We did a Newfound Glory episode in January, I believe, and it was like the first concert I ever went to. Lied to my mom in order to get there, like the local college, and I only knew this one song, but I suffered through Isley, had a good time for Reggie and the Full Effect, and got to see Newfound Glory. And this is the band that I've actually probably seen the most in my life, just because throughout their whole career, their tickets were always like $7. So it was affordable in my teen years. But yeah, "My Friends Over You," it's so good. Just the halftime unapologetically throughout the entire song, never wavering, just doubling down on what they do best. Gotta have it. And then my last one here, I was absolutely not listening to this in 2002, but discovered it in like 2010 maybe. I was working at a coffee shop outside of DC. My buddy Patrick was into like old school hip hop, kind of introduced me to a lot of good stuff and introduced me to the Far Side. So the song, it's called "I'm That Type of N-Word."
Which word? I'm sorry, I don't know. Which word?
It's just, oh God, it's such a good song. Like the opening track of Bizarre Ride 2. I hunted in original vinyl pressing for like years and finally got it. And the bass just kicks so hard. Such a good song. Everyone's verses are so sick, and was, I don't know, one of the first songs I got into way too late of, a genre of that era. And yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. But am starting to feel super self-conscious that I just picked that. But we'll roll with it. So those are my 5.
I would say definitely an eclectic mix there.
You stayed true to at the time stuff and what you found later stuff. So I don't think you like cheated the system too hard. That's a good 5.
So for my final one, this band is super important in my developmental, like just being a social person in life. The band is The Anniversary. They're of the Kansas emo revival of the late 90s. They released an album in 2002 called Your Majesty, and their first song called Sweet Marie is just a great song. But their first full-length album is called Designing a Nervous Breakdown, and that's one of the reason that album is so important to my life is because whenever I was driving around in a car with somebody that wasn't into hardcore, like that's the only CD that I had like at my disposal to put on that wasn't super annoying. So if you ever were in a car with me, you probably have heard Designing a Nervous Breakdown over and over, but then they released Your Majesty and they went into a weird Beatles like obsession phase. So it's like a far cry from like the fun like emo that they were doing and became more like somber and weird, and they started dressing like hippies, and when they would play their older songs live they started doing like weird jams at like keyboard breakdown parts, and it was like disappointing and just like it was pretty bad. But when I got married a couple years back, the Anniversary was doing a reunion tour, and they played the night before my wedding. So my bachelor party, more or less, was getting to see them reunited, playing the songs that they know people wanted to hear. So I got to hear like the best tracks off of Your Majesty, the most of Designing a Nervous Breakdown, and it was like, this is the, like, I'm not a being vegan straight edge guy. You might expect me to be all into strip clubs going, making it rain on women and stuff like that, really being that sort of wild guy. But it turns out I'd rather see a Midwestern emo band at an advanced age play songs that I listened to in my teenage years.
That's fucking awesome. What was the song again?
Sweet Marie. It's the first song off that album. Starts with just a kick drum thing, and just perfect way to enter the album. And the album overall is a decent one. It's like I've listened to it a lot over my years, but if I was reaching for an album from the Anniversary, it's not the first one I would reach for. I would go, the Designing a Nervous Breakdown, then I'd grab their B-sides album that they released, and then it would be Your Majesty, because like I said, they just started taking themselves a little bit too seriously. I think they wanted to progress as musicians, which is like the tragedy of I forget who I was talking with about this, but when you think about like bands like Saves the Day, where they record their best albums when they're 16 years old, and as they get better at playing music, they get worse at like being like they lose what the magic was or something. It's like the fact that you sucked was what made you good.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. God, Beatles. What a tragedy to turn into a Beatles ripoff. It's talked about a lot on the show. I hate the Beatles. So
saying that, I have a question for you. Have you seen the trailer for the movie Yesterday?
No.
Okay, so Yesterday is this movie that is coming out soon, and it basically, this guy that plays in a Beatles cover band, knows every Beatles song. He bonks his head, wakes up after a coma, and he suddenly lives in a world where the Beatles never existed, but he knows all the Beatles songs. Oh. So he lives in a world where the Beatles were never existed, and starts just playing Beatles songs, and people are like, oh, what's that song that you wrote? And he's like, this is Yesterday by the Beatles, or this is Hey Jude by the Beatles. You don't know this? I'm like, no, but that's an amazing song. And he becomes super famous off of these songs, which is such bullshit to me, because without the historical context of the Beatles, if you just drop them into today's atmosphere, nobody pays attention to those songs. The only reason they're good is because of the time they influenced so many musical acts we know today, but they would not make a splash at all if they just existed today. This guy's just writing decent songs that would be listened to as much as some of the obscure bands we've talked about today. You know, like they would not be the Beatles. And that's my rant. The Beatles. They have a couple good tracks, but they don't have some magic in their songs. You know, it's not the fact that their songwriting is so amazing that it transcends time. They're a product of the time.
Pat, you have never been more outnumbered in your life, have you?
It's all right. I mean, I'm not being very controversial by saying like I very much enjoy the Beatles, but that's not like I'm not. It is what it is.
Oh, look at this guy backing down right here. Huh?
No, I'm pretty on the pedestal. Like, yeah, this is the easiest fight I've ever gotten into. The Beatles were, in fact, a good band. You know, like, I don't feel like I'm exactly scrapping on that one. But
right, yeah, 99% of the world does not agree with anything that was said before you were speaking.
My favorite was the Twitter riffs on that trailer, like, somebody starts singing "Somebody Once Told Me," and they're like, "What is that?" Oh, God, I'm in a world without Smash Mouth. Like, and that might be a better movie. Actually, I don't know. Twitter had a field day with that.
Yeah,
one,
I don't want to live in a world where Smash Mouth doesn't exist. So,
right, hey, it'd be a dark place. It'd probably be a Shrekless place, which would be a damn shame.
Oh man.
So I think I have one left.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm going to use my last one to pick one that is actually my fifth, but then start immediately reading through my bench players, and I'm going to read 5 of them, and you can get to see what it should have been, pretty much. So here's 5 songs. The first one will be my actual fifth. Girl All the Bad Guys Want by Bowling for Soup, Swing Swing by All American Rejects, The Anthem by Good Charlotte, Without Me by Eminem, and Dope Nose by Weezer. That should have been my 5.
I can see your age right there just from those songs.
Spelled out.
Like, especially just like Bowling for Soup, like leading that off, just like, oh, right, okay, I am. You guys were in middle school when I was in high school. All right,
right.
Wait, which was the actual pick though?
Girl All the Bad Guys Want.
Oh, is that the one that Adam Schlesinger, the bassist of Fountains of Wayne, wrote for Bowling for Soup?
No, he wrote one for late in their career, I think. I think it was the one High School Never Ends, which was like after Drunk Enough to Dance or something. But yeah, that's a good point. People that were in high school, did they just like, what the hell and why is Bowling for Soup famous? Or
I still have that question about Bowling for Soup at any point in my life. The fact of the matter is, the name alone, Bowling for Soup, is so stupid that if like when I mentioned earlier that Engine Down was the band that I had seen more than ever, if I had listened to all their songs over and over again and you never told me the band name, but then told me it was Bowling for Soup, I'd be like, no, I don't like that band. I absolutely hate it.
That's a steaming hot take, I will say.
Well, if those guys want to lumber their fat asses over to me and say anything about it, bring it.
They can come up to Dorchester and we can sling fists. No. But yeah, those are that's probably should have been it. I couldn't tell if... Oh, I'm interested to hear your guys' bench player tunes, but I couldn't tell if you guys thought of 2002 was a strong or a weak music year overall.
I mean, it had Hot in Here by Nelly. I definitely had Without Me on there. Skater Boy by Avril Lavigne came out.
Solid track.
Yeah, I'm surprised Avril wasn't picked.
You know, she put out a new album at the time of this airing a week ago today. It's pretty good. I listened to it a couple times. This would have been my 6th pick if I had one. The feature Freaks Me Out by Motion City Soundtrack.
No, you're wrong. You got to be wrong.
Super good. I had What's Golden by Jurassic 5. There Is by Boxcar Racer. They came out with their debut and only album that year.
Right, so that would have been a Blink-182 hiatus year then?
Yeah. No, it was the year before. I think they broke up in 2004 or 5, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's where the rift started for sure, leaving Mark out. But,
yeah, for sure.
Also, you know what? Yellow Card did a really good cover of Michelle Branch's Everywhere for what was it? Punk Goes Pop Volume 2. We did a whole Punk Goes Pop episode a couple weeks ago. That was pretty good, and I think this was definitely mentioned on there. Those were all my honorable mentions.
Yeah, so for me, I didn't have that many honorable mentions because the bands that immediately jumped to my head, I was like, all right, that's it. I've got it. I've locked it in. Like, I don't even need to do any more research. I've got my 5. But I mentioned Cave-In a couple of times. They released an EP called Tides of Tomorrow, and they had started as a very heavy, like, metalcore band. I would say they invented the genre. At least they kind of, like, this was when they were like 16 years old, and metalcore eventually became like a weird, like, garbage genre, you know? But like the way they did it at the time, it still ripped. But they started to change their style, and Tides of Tomorrow was a very like low key EP, and it's a little disappointing in the rest of their discography, but it was definitely an EP that I listened to while I was at college a lot. And then also there was a band called Sworn In, and they were a hardcore band out of like London, and now there's another band called Sworn In that's like an active band, and these are two very different bands. But the Sworn In from London or whatever, they released an album on Bridge 9 in 2002, and basically it was like if American Nightmare was more obsessed with Morrissey, then this was what Sworn In was. And so I listened to that, and the song Pretty Girls Die Just the Same was a particularly good song off of that 9-minute full length.
Nice. I got a lot of homework, a lot of catching up on.
I am so fucking pissed that I didn't realize that Motion City Soundtrack or Taking Back Sunday album came out this year. I'm sorry, Bill. My game was not strong coming in, and I am legitimately upset. Like I'm like an upset person.
Hey, don't worry, man. You got Vanessa Carlton.
I might go as far as to say "dang flabbit." You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I know.
That's worse than the other word that was kind of alluded to earlier.
Man, I can't. The future freaks me out. Well, I won't dwell, but this has been a botched exercise. Bill, I'm sorry you had to see this. I really am. Because it was a gosh darn pleasure having you on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
John.
Well, before we get out of here, I mean, we talked about songs of the past. We can do our Song of the Week segment. Anything that you guys have been listening to recently that you've been loving?
I'll knock one out real quick. Just because usually this is the part of the show where I'm Googling while Tom says something real quick. So I would love to provide that service for anybody this week if need be. I've mentioned Charlie Bliss on the show before. It's a band I've gotten into a lot over the past several years. They have an album coming out in May, but they dropped a single recently, Capacity. It's on, I think it's everywhere you find your whateverness. But pretty good tune. I just like Charlie Bliss a lot. And yeah, I've been getting into that.
And as somebody, I don't listen to as much music anymore as I used to. I'm one of those guys that listens to more podcasts now than anything. So when I do find a song that I enjoy, I tend to overplay it to a crazy amount. And
Same.
One song that I was surprised that I enjoyed so much, you might have heard this song. I don't know. I think it's been around a little bit, and I still think it's kind of popular, but it's called Shallows by Lady Gaga, and it's got Bradley Cooper on there. Have you guys heard that song?
Yeah, the Star is Born soundtrack?
Yeah. I think it like won, I don't know, like 3 or 4 Grammys or something like that. So it's still pretty obscure.
Real underground effort from Gaga, right?
Yeah. It's one of her lesser known tracks, but I just remember last year while going to a friend of mine when I lived in Portland, same buddy that we bonded over Taking Back Sunday. What we would do every Sunday is go see the worst movie we could, what we'd look at the listings, see what looked the worst, and then just go see that. And when they were playing like the Star is Born trailer, and it was like that one part where Lady Gaga's doing that like crazy like yowl, I would just be like I'd start like tearing up and be like, what's wrong with me?
Getting older is a weird
yeah. You guys just wait. You're still in your 20s. Wait till 30 clicks over, and all of a sudden, Lady Gaga songs make you tear up for no reason.
Oh man,
I'm kind of ready for that. Actually, that sounds nice.
The Dangerous Summer released a new single today called "Where Were You When the Sky Opened Up." It was produced by Sam Pura. We did an interview with him. It was episode 93 on the Story So Far's album production. I've been a huge fan of Dangerous Summer. I lived in the DC area. They were up in Baltimore. I saw them a ton. And yeah, I think Reach for the Sun, their first album, might be like one of my definitely top 10 of all time. And the song they've released today or Tuesday sounds more like I don't want to say return to form because they've always stayed pretty consistent and on brand, but it's just super good. Sam did a really good job. I'm really excited to dig into a new album this year from them. So
Excellente.
Yeah, Bill, so happy that you took an hour out of your evening to come on and chat with us about this. I know it's probably a little different than some of the other shows you've been doing, but I feel like
this one I can honestly say was better. I hope they don't listen.
We were very worried, so I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, or hopefully you enjoyed yourself.
It's much better to do a podcast with a theme to it as opposed to doing 5 in a row where the theme is just we're just going to talk to you, and where you have to answer the same questions and try to be enthusiastic about it, where it's like because you just start to feel like the fraud. It's not any fault of the podcaster, they're just doing their show, but like after like the 5th time you're like, oh well, damn, I feel like do I need to make something up? It's like, no, just keep saying it. But so the fact that I got to do something different today and actually talk about the arguably amazing tracks that I've listed off. I mean, I would say, I don't know, these are probably the 5 best songs of all time, just conservatively. So it was good to get to talk about the year 2002, the year of my graduation, and all that good stuff. So thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, man. It was a pleasure.
No problem. We're glad you didn't run into us for the first. It took us 75 episodes to realize that we needed to have a theme. We did an episode about Mmmbop kind of on a whim. We're like, oh, this is what it's like to have a plan to actually put something out there. So anyway, 2002. This was fun. This was nice.
Yeah, so I guess to all the listeners, thanks for sticking with us for an unusually long episode, but it was awesome.
Go follow the Hard Times on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we're at Real Punk News on Twitter. We're on Instagram at The Hard Times News. And thehardtimes.net is the main place to go. And we got a podcast where you can download on all the... If you are listening to this, you know how to download a podcast. So it's very easy to find, the Hard Times podcast. I think you'll enjoy it.
Awesome. All right, man. Thanks so much, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Look, I understand. One of my picks was from the year 1992. Get used to it. It's going to happen every time. I'm sorry. But thank you so much to Bill Conway for coming on the show. Check out thehardtimes.net. It is the funniest you will ever read. Also, check out whoisroncarnage.com/buy to pre-order our brand new anti-novel coming out March 15th. We'll be back next week after a short trip to Vegas for a very exciting interview. Stay tuned for details on that. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.